Good day, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. Today we will talk about Elpical Claro, automatic image enhancement. I will start with a short presentation, and then I'll go straight into what Claro can actually do by showing you in the program itself. So as I said, Claro serves to do automatic image enhancement. This is based on an individual image analysis. So you can have Claro analyze your images one by one, see what exactly might be improved on every specific image, and then execute that improvement. This is a form of dynamic image enhancement. Let's imagine it's the automatic way. If it is fully automatic, what you would have, like for example with Photoshop droplets or batch processing, is that every image is edited the exact same way. So you will always be adding the same amount of brightness to every image. Now, what happens if your image is already bright enough, or if it is too bright, then you will just make it worse. Now, if you look at dynamic image enhancement, that will be a person sitting in front of Photoshop and changing the images one by one, looking at the images, appreciating the images, and then making the decisions. Now, Claro works as the person would. So Claro looks at the image, checks, oh, this might be too bright, and reduces the brightness a little bit. If the next image isn't bright enough, it will increase the brightness. So it is dynamic and it is automatic. You can have multiple channels for different workflows, because not every workflow, not every output that you have might need the same type of results, and you can have those images automatically routed towards the correct channel. This results in less one-by-one image editing. If you have a workflow where you are passing hundreds, maybe even thousands images a day, and you are currently having them automatically edited, then not always your results might not always be perfect. So maybe you have a person looking at the images one by one and seeing, oh, I have to improve this image, this one is okay, I have to improve this image. There is no longer any need for one by one image editing. With Claro, you can get consistent results and consistent quality while increasing your productivity because the actual enhancement is automatic. Now, of course, you might not want to trust the program with everything. You might still want to keep control of the processing and to keep your manual editing as well. Well, Claro has the Claro Inspector for Adobe Photoshop, which can be used in three ways. The inspector makes it possible for your images to go through Photoshop to see the original image. You see next to it the image as Claro has enhanced it, and you can compare for yourself and then make your decision. You might want to keep the original, you might want to keep the processed image. If you think, oh, neither of these is completely correct, you can still in Photoshop edit the image that you like the most manually by doing whatever you think is necessary, and then choose that image instead. So you still have full control of the image in Photoshop as well. You can see three methods here. You can have every image that goes through Claro be processed automatically. Then every image is just passed away and no images pass Photoshop. Then you have the chance to say, I only want images that aren't completely accurate to pass through Photoshop. So you can set your limits within Claro, so only images that do not pass your check, so only the rejected images, go through Photoshop, and you can have a look at those, because all the other ones are fine. And then you can have every image pass through Photoshop, and you can have a look at every one and make a decision for yourself for every single picture that passes through the program. I put a manual with a question mark. This is because you don't have to do the editing. It's not fully manual. Every image is enhanced by Claro first, And then you see the original image and the enhanced image next to each other, but you have to manually choose which one you want to take, every single image. While with the fully automatic version, every image just passes through. And with a fully manual workflow, you would have to do the enhancements and the editing yourself as well. Side-by-side comparison, that's because the images are next to each other and you can just see which is better. Then this basically results in a workflow where you have to do less effort. Another application that you have with Claro is the job client. The job client is a plugin for Adobe InDesign, which will extract the images from your InDesign document and put them through the Claro workflow and then just input them again in the InDesign document. That way you can make your layout in InDesign and then have your images improved at the last minute and they just re-enter into your InDesign workflow, so you don't have to go look for the original files, open them in Photoshop, edit them, and then refresh links or whatever. You can just have the files straight to Claro and straight back to InDesign to make your workflow more efficient and easier for the person doing the layout. Then you can also extract images from PDF files. These have to be non-flattened PDF files. That makes sense when you think about it, because flattening often merges objects with transparency with the images underneath and creates new objects and new images. And if all images from a flattened PDF are put through the Claro workflow, every one of those new images, which are just parts of the greater image, will be processed individually. And because one might be a big shadowy part and one might be only a highlight, they might no longer fit together because they will be processed differently. So you can only use non-flattened PDFs where the images are still their own full image. They are also extracted from the PDF, edited, and put back into the PDF. And then you have your PDF with your images that have been improved. You also have a one-to-many workflow with Claro. You can use the routing channels to have one image pass through multiple channels. The channels are with the different workflows that you have that go to different output intents. So you can have one source image go through multiple of those and have multiple output images. That way you can have your image for your printed magazine, but also for your online version of the magazine. And you can just do it with the same original image in one go. Now I will go straight into the program and I will show you how everything works and where you can find everything within Elpical Claro. On this slide you can see my data on the bottom right. My name is Michiel. I work at 4Piece as application specialist and you can see my email address underneath. On the left side, you see support@4piece.com and orders@4piece.com. Any technical questions or support questions about any of our software, you can ask at support@4piece.com, and one of our support team will have a look at your question and respond within 2 days. And the second email address, orders@4piece.com, you can go to them with any commercial question, and they will also reply as fast as they can. Let's get into the application. What we see here is the Claro administration window. This is a client view of what is essentially a web server program. So this isn't actually the application. The application is running as a server basis on, in this particular case, on my local host. So it's running in the background. The administration window is just used for an admin to access the server and to change the settings, to set up the channels, to make sure everything works as expected. The actual users will barely get into contact with this. They will just be using the inspector and the hot folders. The Claro channels work on a server basis. They work with hot folders. So you can see the channels I have right here. These are all hot folder channels with different settings. So you have an input folder, you have your Claro enhancement, and you have your output folder. You can see two of my channels have an extra symbol, this loop here. This is when you are using the inspector. So in these two workflows, I have them set up to pass every single image that goes into Claro through the Photoshop inspector. Let's have a look at how the settings look like, I will first go through all the settings of a channel, and then I will go to the Photoshop inspector and we will see how it is for the actual user to experience the program and how easy everything works there. So on the first page in the channel, you have your channel name. You can name it after whatever your users want to see there. So probably your output intent, what you want to use the images for. And then we have all the different settings on the left here. So let's start with input. Input is what where your input folder goes and what the settings for that folder are. So we have the source folder, the input folder. The default location for that is Applications, Elpical Claro in, and then the name of the channel. So I have my in folder for the demo channel is inside the Claro in folder named demo. Then we have the possibility to scan subfolders. In the output options, you will also be able to mirror those subfolders. So if you put one folder for magazine edition 12 in your input folder, then you will have a magazine edition 12 folder in your output folder. Then we have the possibility to remove empty subfolders, so empty folders are just deleted. And you can also only scan job files. So Claro can work with XML job files that can make it easier to use Claro within your workflow. So you only put in the XML files, and those files link to the images that need to be processed instead of throwing the images in there. Then we have a delay of so many seconds before the files are ready. This gives you some time to input all the files you want to input, and you can set a priority for your channel. So obviously the highest number is the highest priority, and they will get processed faster. And then you can also say, I don't want to process any files or folders that match a certain name, and those will be either deleted or skipped and moved to the unprocessed folder. That is basically what the input folder is. Now we have some advanced settings in some of these. This will allow for soft exposure correction for RAW files because the linear exposure is often a bit hard, a bit sharp, and you can use soft exposure for RAW files. In the inputs, you can actually input any usual files, so pretty much any image format can be inputted, but also the Photoshop files, of course, and InDesign files that will be used with the InDesign system, and PDFs. So also RAW files because they are image files. Then we have this channel is available for the job client, which means the InDesign files will be accepted and will be able to use InDesign files with this channel. And you have the IPTC character set that will be used for this, and that is to read and parse the metadata for the pictures. Then we have the input conversion. This is what happens with the files that go into Claro before they are enhanced. So every image has its own current state of being, but we want to use Claro with a standard working profile. The working RGB profile, it is always an RGB profile, will be set here. So it is Adobe RGB 1998. But what we have to assume for pictures that do not have an embedded profile, what profile they are. So we can convert them to the working space and then can do the enhancing in that working space. So for RGB images, we're assuming they are sRGB. For grayscale, we're assuming they're sGray. And for CMYK without embedded profile, we're assuming ISO-coded V2. You should set this to what is the most likely color space for files coming in without an embedded profile in your workflow. Then it is set to the working space, and we can also say use the original RGB as a working profile instead of the working RGB. Then the rendering intent is by default set to perceptual, but you can set it yourself to another rendering intent that you would like to see. Let's go on to multi-layer. In the multi-layer options, because sometimes you have layered files, this can be files coming from Photoshop or PDFs or TIFFs. Sometimes you have files that have layers in there. You can choose which layer is being processed. So usually the default setting is the compatibility setting. That is normally the best setting, but you can also say the top visible or the actual top layer, the bottom visible or the actual bottom layer. You can also use the name of the layer you want to process if you have a workflow where you know that name. Then we also have options for the size of incoming documents. You can set the DPI for your document, so you might want it to be 300 instead of 200 DPI. Now, of course, if I change the pixel density, the dots per inch, to 300, then my physical image size will shrink because the pixel will be closer together. If I want the physical size to remain the same, I would have to resample my image, so you have the option to resample your image as well. You can set it to only downsample, only upsample, or up and downsample. I would like to set it to only downsample because then you're sure you will not be decreasing the quality of your image, while with upsampling, sometimes you can see that your quality goes down a little bit. And you can also set the new size after resampling. You can set it to a certain height, width, or specific pixel sizes. Now, of course, this works with the DPI and the resampling, so you have to make sure this corresponds a bit. You can change the orientation of your images based on the EXIF information. So this is the metadata that is added by the camera. Then you can also say the maximum image size is 50 megapixels for input, 50 for output. And you can also set the maximum file size in megabytes for input. Then we will do a first quality check. The quality check is meant to recognize the potential problem images. So this is where images that are not good enough are being rejected. So if you use your workflow in a way that only rejected images go through your Photoshop inspector, then you will have to set these settings here in the quality check. You can set it to reject in the first place. So if you don't do this, then you will not be doing that quality check, and every image will be going either through the workflow or to the inspector, depending on your settings. If you set it to reject, then you can choose different options here. We have color balance, brightness, sharpness, and noise. And all of these, because it is a dynamic analysis, they're not very rigid. You have the default setting, which is where Claro draws the line, but you can also make it a little more flexible or a little more strict. And you can do that for all of these 4 settings. So if you are less flexible or your images are being rejected too much, you can change these settings to make it a little less extreme. Then another setting is when they are rejected based on color gamut. You can set this to say, well, if my colors are out of gamut of the input conversion profile by a certain amount, then they are also rejected. And we can set the resize quality factor. The resize factor, they cannot be enlarged more than 2 times or they will be rejected. These 2 are based on your settings here. We can also reject any image that is already in CMYK, images without embedded profiles, or images with red eyes. If you don't have to reject red eyes, there is actually a setting to fix that in the image enhancement as well. So this is how Claro decides which images will be rejected and sent through to the Photoshop inspector. Then the next setting is the workflow setting. This is how you route your files. So you can set it to automatic handling, which would be process all images. You can set it to send rejected images to the Claro inspector, which is the semi-automatic handling, where you only see images that aren't good enough in your Photoshop inspector. Or you can set it to save rejected images to the unprocessed folder. This is again an automatic setting where rejected images are just not processed. Or you can send all the images to the inspector, which is the manual between codes setting, where you just see every image pass through Photoshop and you can decide for yourself. I will leave it on this because then it's easier for me to show you in the demo with the inspector that all the images come through. Then the folder for unprocessed images, so all the rejected images or the images that are not being processed will be put in a certain folder. By default, this folder is named bad, and it is located also in the Claro installation folder. Then we have the possibility to mirror the input subfolders. That's what I said earlier with the input. You can have Claro mirror the folders that the images were in when you dropped them into the in folder, in the out folder, so it's easier to find images that belonged together. You can apply an output conversion before the inspector for original images or for processed images. Now I leave it on processed images because then the images are converted to the working space, are enhanced, and are then when they are processed also converted to the output profile before you see them in Photoshop. You can also set the same for original images, so both your images when you are comparing them have been converted. And then you can also email on failure. Now, a failure is not when an image is rejected based on your settings. A failure is when an image is not being processed because of a corrupted file or a broken file, basically. So if you turn that function on, you will not get emails for every single picture that is being sent to the Photoshop inspector. You will only get them when you have corrupted files to make you aware that a certain file was corrupted and the workflow for that file isn't working. If you're using this, you will need an SMTP server, so you will need a mail server set up for that, and you can choose the input and the output address. Then in advanced, you can also set not to apply a CMYK output profile if the image is CMYK after inspector. This specific setting is for manual editing. So if the image opens in Photoshop and you manually change the output profile to CMYK, so you do the conversion yourself in Photoshop, then after the inspector, your file will be in CMYK. Claro will recognize this and it will not reconvert your profile to the CMYK profile set in the output conversion. The same for the black and white. So if it is a grayscale image and you already made it grayscale in Photoshop, then it will not do that again. And when you have RGB images that are grayscale, so an image that visually looks like grayscale but is still in RGB color space, you can have those converted to an actual grayscale color space. Then we can go into the image enhancement. This is what Claro is actually all about. This is what Claro is meant to do. So it will enhance your images. Now, important to know, these sliders we have here, they are not values, they are target levels. So if you turn this sharpness dial down to -2.5, or let's say -1, that doesn't mean that every single image going through your channel will be less sharp than when it came in. It means that what Claro thinks is the necessary sharpness, being 0, it will be a little bit less sharp than that. So if you feel that Claro is processing your files and it's making all your files too sharp, then you turn that dial to minus. Let's say I'll put it on -0.5 because I know that Claro sometimes makes the images a little bit too sharp. The same counts for all the other ones. So turning up the brightness will not turn up the brightness for every single image, only for images that are too dark. Images that are too bright might still be toned down a little bit based on these sliders. So to set these for your personal workflow, what you need to do is you need to get a stack of images that are representative of your normal workload. So you need at least 10. 10 is really the bare minimum. You need like 20, 30 images that you used, and they have to be representative of your normal workload. So some might be too bright, some might be too dark, but it has to be what you normally see. You have to take all those images, put them through the Claro, and then look at the results and say, well, the results of all these images is still a little bit too dark, I might want to turn up the brightness a little bit. You should only change one of these settings at a time, because if you change multiple settings, you won't be knowing what's going on. And every time you change it by a little bit, you have to look at your results. If you notice that you are putting these sliders way too far, then you might have it might be better to start from default again and try again from scratch, because this shouldn't happen. This shouldn't be the normal workflow. Then you have the possibility to set your black and white points. The advanced options for that are over here. We'll see them in a second. And we have noise filters, contrast filters, local contrast for shadows and highlights. That is, they work the same way. They work with the values. Now, you have an extra button here to exclude skin tones for highlights. This is because skin tones often are in the highlights or in the brighter parts of the image. And applying the contrast here, increasing the contrast specifically, might make blemishes in the skin more accentuated. So it might put a little bit more focus and sharpness there. And of course, that's not usually what we want to see. So we can exclude the skin tones from that, so we don't have that extra contrast in the skin tones. Then we can also set the color balance. This will make sure that a neutral color is neutral and balance the colors around that. And we can suppress JPEG artifacts. So JPEG artifacts, that is like when you have an image with a lot of small detail that is already been compressed into JPEG format. Oftentimes you see when you zoom in, you have these little pixel artifacts around those details. Very often, if you have text in an image, which is something that shouldn't usually be the case, you can see those. And this is a way for Claro to suppress those artifacts and to reduce the amount you see there. So it's almost magical if you use that. And then this is the advanced setting for the black and white point. You can set your black point and your white point to a certain percentage. Oftentimes, this is not 100, but like 98 and 2. And there's also a little bit of clipping, black point and white point clipping. It's by default on 1.0.1. That's because it's the same setting Photoshop uses, for example. It's the accepted standards in the industry. That's because oftentimes you have some noise in your image, and your noise will might always be perfect black or perfect white, which means that they will always be your black and your white point, because they will be the first pixel value in the dark areas or in the light areas. We want to exclude those, and we can do that by setting that to 0.1% instead of 0. And we can also set the black and the white limit. We can also apply filters. The noise filter in luminosity mode. This means the image is first converted to LAB, and the noise filter is applied there. The same for the contrast. This reduces banding, but it might also reduce the actual effect you have of the noise filter. It might be a little bit less heavy than you would have if you don't check this. And then we have apply brightness only for midtones to exclude the highlights and the shadows from the brightness settings. We can go on to the colors. Here we have that remove red eyes setting, and we can also have it set to a certain strength. An extra feature here is that you can only use this if the flash is used. This is once again based on the metadata from the camera. So if you check this, normally red eyes only occur when the flash is used. So if you set that, then you will make sure that there are no false positives for the red eyes, because sometimes there can be false positives, and then you will see these black dots in an image. And with this, you can also already reduce that a little bit, and you can set strength to a certain amount depending on what your results are in your images. I will not have this checked right now. And then Claro is able to filter to mask skin colors, green tones, and blue tones. Now, skin colors will not only work for the European skin tones, it will also work for the more African skin tones. It is based on what your images are and the detection of Claro itself. So it is accurate. it uses a range of colors, and you can decide you want to make them more red or you want to make them more yellow with the skin tone adjustment here. This should only be you should only use these once you are working with your representative images to see what your results are. And once again, you can set the strength based on a value. You can make it harder or less effective. And you can also change the saturation and the brightness for those skin tones. The same applies for green. If you want to apply a tone adjustment, you can make it more yellow or more blue, set the strength, set the saturation and the brightness. So this will usually only affect, for example, grass fields, trees in the background, anything like that. You might want to change those to a little bit more of a warmer color, depending on what your workflow is. Then we have blue tones. We can apply those to make it more of a light blue or more of a purple. Strength, saturation, brightness, and you can also suppress the banding. And then in the color filter, you can also set a filter, warming or cooling, and you can strengthen it or decrease the strength, as we have seen a few times already. And then you can say we want to keep the neutral colors, so neutral colors are not affected. You want to keep the sky colors, so the blue remains blue, and you might want to keep the skin colors. Now, this isn't like you will not see a full sepia result when using something like this, but it will make the entire image seem a little bit warmer. With these settings on, that should actually give a really nice result and not an overkill color filtered result. Then we can go over to PDF. As I said, it is possible to process PDF files. The images will be extracted from the PDF file and then processed individually and then put back into the PDF file. There are a few settings here that are to make sure that you only process the images you want to process. One of them is the minimum number of pixels that has to be in the process. You also have do not process images with few colors. Both of those are meant to not process, for example, small logos or low quality banners or mostly logos really that might be present in the PDF but are not an image. They're not like a photo. And you do not want to process those. So you want to exclude them here instead of seeing them going to your reject system. Then you can also say we do not process CMYK images or grayscale images. And we can skip or process images if the metadata field of the image is something. So we can say we do not process images, so we skip images that have a metadata tag, for example, that it's made by a photographer. So if you have in your workflow a lot of pictures made and already edited by photographers, you might not want to have those processed. So you can set a metadata in that PDF for those images and make sure that you don't process those. And we shall not do that right here. Then we have the knots with a few colors, yes, because logos often only have 3 to 4 colors. We can also have ignore images that are placed side by side or overlapping, as to make sure that when you have images with transparency or images that are stuck to each other but are meant to be the same color are not processed, so the color is not changed, and then you will not see the difference between those two images. Oftentimes you have images that are placed next to each other that are meant to look like one image, and you want to make sure those aren't changed so they don't suddenly show a line in between those images. And then we can also process images with a certain compression. So we can use JPEG or zip compression. And if the original is lossy, you can set it to JPEG. The JPEG quality can be set as well. Then if you want to, you can extract those images to a certain folder as well. Otherwise, they are just placed back into the PDF. Okay, going to output conversion, we're almost there. I hope you haven't fallen asleep yet. In output conversion, we can choose what profiles the images will be converted to after the enhancement has happened. So images are always converted to Adobe RGB first to be enhanced, and then they can be converted to your output profile. So we can set an output ICC profile. We can make that, it looks like it opened on my other screen. We can set that to something we like to use, for example, PSO coded v3 for if you want to go to CMYK, we can set it to Adobe sRGB if we don't want to keep it in Adobe to sRGB instead of Adobe RGB. If you don't want to keep it in Adobe RGB, you might have your reasons to set it to a certain output intent. You can set it separately for grayscale images, and you can choose your rendering intent. By default, the rendering intent is perceptual that is being used here, but if your out of gamut percentage is higher than a certain degree, you can set it to make sure that it is using another rendering intent. We can embed the profile, of course we want to do that, and then we can convert to black and white using an output intent, convert to black and white using a mix of color channel. So here you're using a grayscale ICC, here you're using CMYK, and you can limit the colors in your output as well. Then we can set compensation curves. These are applied on every image and are not based on an analysis. So it is important to know that you should only change these curves if you have a workflow that really calls for it, because they will happen during the output conversion, and doing that will affect every image the same way. It is not based on analysis and it is not variable. And you can set those for all curves for red, green, blue, or gray. And then we have the output. This is back to a bit of the workflow scenario. So you can set your out folder, which the default destination is in the Claro installation folder. We have an out folder and then the name of the channel. So it is demo again. You can have a backup destination folder that will be used if this one is unavailable. And you can choose the format for your file. So you can keep it to the original file format or JPEG, TIFF, PSD, EPS, GIF, or PNG. So you can choose between any of these depending on your preference and set the quality of your lossy JPEG. And then we can add prefixes, suffixes, extensions depending on your workflow system. So I put my file name suffix to Claro. I might prefer to do that in the prefix. That way you know those files have been processed by Claro. You can also change your extension to something or add an extension if the original has none. This is checked by default. Then you can use the file name suffix for grayscale images, so you know they're black and white. There you go. You can use unique file names on output. If you already have a file with the same name, the file will be put next to it with a unique name, so it doesn't overwrite anything. We can mirror the input subfolders. We've already seen how that works. And we can copy the original to a different folder. So that way you also keep your original file. This is good for non-lossy workflows, so you can always go back if you need to. Then you can also use a suffix when copying the originals when you're doing this. So you can use a suffix, basically say original. And you can also send it to an FTP destination if you work like that. We have multi-layer options. When you're using files with layers, you can choose to keep those layers in your output file, to add a compatibility layer to preserve the alpha or masking channels. Then you can say we want the original as one layer, we want the processed as one layer on top of that file, and we have the compression for those layers. We have XMP options, so metadata options. If you use a workflow that uses those, IPTC, which is also which is the channel used for your metadata as well. And then we have advanced, where we can strip the metadata. So with these we can add metadata. With the advanced we can also strip that metadata. We can set Photoshop guides for soft cropping. So if you have if your image is being soft cropped, you can either clip the image and lose part of the image, or you can, when soft cropping, you can also add those guides to it. So in Photoshop, you know where what part of the image is being viewed. This happens a lot in InDesign when you have a box for your image which is smaller than the image, so you're soft cropping it, but you're not actually reducing the image size. So if later you decide you want to have that image 5 pixels more to the left, you can still do that. If you use this, you will see in Photoshop where what part of the image is actually being shown. We can also reroute a job to a different channel. We can execute an external program if we want to, or we can add a watermark. We got there, yay! We went through all the settings you can have on an image channel. Now, I forgot to tell you in the beginning, there is more than one type of channel. Let me put this on the right screen so we can actually see it. There are actually 4 types of channels. So let's go through all the other ones as well, shall we? No, I shan't, but I'll just tell you what they do. So image processing is what we just went through. It's the real deal. It's what Claro is for. A routing channel can be used to get your one input image and put it through different channels based on the certain characteristics for that image. So let's say your image that comes in is recognized as being CMYK. Let's have a look anyway. So you can have your input file. This is exactly the same we've seen before, but then you have if and else, and you can add input conditions for your if. You can say the image is a certain something. So the image is, the name contains, for example, fashion, and then you want to put it in your fashion queue. Or the name contains, I don't know, cars, and you want to put it in your car queue. You can do that here, and you can make sure the images end up in the correct channel. You can also use metadata for that. You can use the color space. You can say any CMYK image has to pass through a different channel than the RGB images. And that way you can automatically route your incoming images to the correct channel to be processed the correct way. And then you can use the then. If something happens, then it goes through the fashion channel. Else, it goes through the magazine ISO-coded channel. And that's how you can set that. You can add as many conditions with ifs and else if you want. This can go very complicated. This can make your workflow completely automated if you want to do that here. Of course, if you're using Claro within a different workflow, let's just think of a laid-back file train or an in-focus switch, you can just have those programs drop the file in the correct in folder and you don't have to use a routing channel. Then we also, it's back over there again. We also have a device link channel. This is basically any incoming file can be converted to the processing color space using a device link profiling. And then you have the purging channel, and this is just here to automatically empty folders with rejected images. So if you have thousands of files passing to your workflow, oftentimes you will have images being rejected and those folders don't clear themselves. So those stack up and those take up space and you don't actually need those documents. So you can make a purging channel and that will remove those images based on a certain parameter. So you can say, I want to remove any image in that folder older than 50 days, for example. And then after 50 days, the files will get removed. I don't want to have more than 20 files in there. So the 21st file, then the first file will be removed. And that way you can keep control of the files that you haven't processed, and they don't just take up space somewhere on your system. So now that we've seen the entire program here, I think it's time to process some images. So I'll just throw some files in my demo queue input folder. Let's put these in there as well. There we go. I just threw some files in there. In a few seconds, we will see those appearing here in the input folder. There we go. We see there are 8 files detected here, and one of them has already been analyzed. Now they're going to stack up here because this is my Photoshop inspector. So they can't pass through there because I set it to every single image has to pass the Photoshop inspector. You can see they're all being analyzed, they're all being enhanced, and they're all being sent to the Photoshop inspector. After I inspect them, they will go through to the output folder. So let's just have a look at the inspector, shall we? I have the inspector right here. It's a separate client application, and that's the application that's, where did you go? There you are. That's the application that the actual users of the program will see the most often, because this is the admin field. Normally, you don't have to play with that once your setup is correct. This is the inspector field. This is where the actual processing happens. You can see this is flashing red. That means the next image that has to go to the inspector has arrived. So let's click that button. And now Photoshop will open. There we are. We have the original image on the left. We have the processed image on the right. And we can check for the differences. We will also see over here with the processing information, we can see what happens to the image. So the most obvious one here is it has been sharpened by 300%, the brightness has been improved by 1.04, and the color balance has been improved. Those are pretty obvious. You can see this color here is more neutral over here. You can also see the sharpening is a little bit more obvious. You can see that over here, and for example, the bracelets are fairly obvious. I hope you can see that on your screen. This is more sharp over here. The color has been changed. I believe in this specific case, the processed image is a lot nicer than the original, especially towards color balance. So then over here, you can choose to keep either the original or the processed file. So let's say over here, I want to keep the processed file. It closes up, and the next button will be flashing red again. There we go. I can click next. My next image will open. This is one of those cases where maybe it would have been a good idea to not have the contrast happen in the skin tones, because skin blemishes might become more obvious. Now we can see once again some sharpening has occurred in this image. The profile conversion is visible in here. You can see all the things that have been improved. So there is noise reduction, the contrast has been changed, and the skin colors has been improved. So you can choose which one you like best. Now let's say I like this image, but it's not completely what I want. I could take a tool. So let's just make it obvious and put a big stamp on there. So if I want to keep the image after editing, so right now I just put a big thing on there, but that might be, an extra channel to improve the saturation, or that might be a brightening or a specific local editing that you have done. So maybe you want to take away a few of those skin blemishes. You can do that, and if you then choose the processed picture, then the image with your changes will be saved to your processed folder. This is a good example to show you that skin tones are also being recognized with dark-skinned people. This image is really, really dark. This is the improved version. Oftentimes with party images especially, you see that the incoming quality really isn't that good. We can only hope to make the quality of the image as a whole a bit better. You can see everything that happened to this image. You can choose the picture, and now I believe the rest will be, there we go, brighter images. You can see in this one, the differences are a bit less obvious. You can see the shadow here. This is a bit darker, this is a bit lighter. The same in the car area. There's a bit of sharpening happening in the headlights. You can see everything that changed. Once again, choose the file you want. And just it keeps on going like that, so you can see before and after and choose the image you want. That's how easy it is for a user. Now, of course, I told the program to pass every single image through Claro. You don't have to do this. You can have Claro do this stuff automatically and only send them through the inspector once they hit one of your settings that tells Claro this is rejected. A person has to have a look at that. So then you're not just clicking process next the entire time. You only have to see the images that actually have been recognized as not good enough. Now let's say we want to try this with an InDesign file. So I actually have an InDesign file as well. Let's open that up. Let's use this one. So it has a few penguins in here. These are actually images. So if we go to the window, we have the Claro job client over here. So we can say, let's have a look at the job client. And then you can say, I want to do only the selected image. So if I select the high-res image here, I can say only do the selected image. I can choose which channel I want to put that through. So let's put it through the demo channel. And you can add a message for the inspector, because you might not be the person that's inspecting the image, because Claro is running on a server. So maybe the people that do the image inspections are other people that have the Claro inspector, and you are just the person who does the layouting. You can add your message so the people know that. Let's say add, you can see the image is being sent, and we should get a message in the inspector once the file went through. So if we look at, I think we have 2 images waiting in the inspector. Oh, there was actually already something open. Open. Oh yeah, of course we still have images waiting here. So let's say processed. I have to start it here. Okay, so the file should be in the inspector now. There we go. The inspector has turned red. Click next. Here we have my penguin before and after. Let's put that out of the way for a bit. You can see in the phase a lot has happened. It might not be an improvement because this starting image was already a professional image. So all the sharpening that happened here probably wasn't necessary. So I can say I want to keep the original image. And then in InDesign, the original image will be put back into place. Now, if you want to have, there you go. If you let's, you know what? Let's change this image and let's see that that actually works. So use a selected image. We can add it to the demo queue. I can say start the queue. Okay. Is the image going through? We can have a look. Maybe I'll try this one. There we go. Start the queue. The other one had already been processed, so it wasn't recognized anymore. It will be sent. There we go. We have the next button. We have the before and after. Now let's put that stamp on there again. Let's put a big old stamp on there. And now let's say I want to have the processed file used. And now if we go here and we want the program to update, we can see that stamp has been placed on that image. The image is just being put back into the application. So there we have it. This is how Claro works. Let's show you the admin field again. So as administrator, you have this set up on a server. Now, of course, in a production environment, you might want to make sure, especially if you're running lots of production files, that nothing goes wrong with this. So you can set up your Claro server in a cluster. That way you have more than one Claro server running with the identical settings, and then you can divide the load. So either you have a lot of images going through and your one server can't handle all the images, then you have 2 servers taking care of that, or maybe if one server dies for whatever reason, then the second server can take over the load and make sure your production doesn't suffer. So you can have Claro run like that as well, and that can go from 2 licenses up to as many as you deem necessary. Then you can have as many inspectors as you need. And you can set up the inspector. So one inspector, for example, only looks at the fashion queue, while another inspector looks at the magazine queue. And that way you can divide up that load to your inspectors as well. And that's how Claro runs in the background. So you can have as many of these as you want set up, and then as inspector, you will only see this window and your Photoshop, and you will go through the images and decide which is best. So thank you very much for attending. Here you see the emails again, support, orders, and my personal. I hope you enjoyed the demonstration. I hope you learned something.